Today we are going to replace the steering Pitman and Idler arms for a Hummer H2. The techniques in this video are also applicable to the GM GMT 800 platform, meaning if you can follow this video, you should be able to do this job on Tahoes, Suburbans, Silverados, and other GM SUVs of that era. The first step is to raise the vehicle safely and remove the skid plates. The Hummer H2 is large enough that with 35-inch tires, lifting it may not even be necessary. From the back side of the engine where the oil drain pan is, you'll notice these bar skid protectors for the transfer case comes up underneath your front suspension skid plate. There are 9 bolts that make up the skid plate. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9 are 3 up front, which will show. Now this can be a little difficult to take off by yourself. Therefore, you can get this floor jack or a floor jack and set it up right there to loosen these bolts so it doesn't fall on your head. Putting it back in, on the other hand, is a little hard because of aligning these bolts. Take a little bit of trial and error, make sure all the bolts go in square, and don't strip them out. Once you get the skid plate off, it might be a good time to locate the Pitman and Idler arms, squirt the bolted joints with penetrant oil, and let it sit overnight. The Pitman arm is located under the engine on the driver's side. It is connected to the gearbox up front and the steering drag link behind. There is a bar up front which prevents you from getting a socket under the gearbox nut. You will have to get a 1 5/16 wrench and loosen it by hand. If you are lucky, the nut won't be on very tight and it will be easy, yet tedious, to work it loose. And it should come right off. Okay, once that nut is off, get a 13/16 impact and come down to the back side and get rid of that nut there. Ready? Yep. So on the back side drag link end, you have enough room to get a standard ball joint puller on. Slide it over between the boot and the bar, and then tighten up the black impact portion on the bolt. Then take your impact and tighten that up. Down on the bottom side, we have a 3/4 impact on this particular tool. Ready? Yep. Boom. When it pops, it's off. Halfway done with the hardest one. Hold on. To remove the steering box, to get yourself more clearance, pull that off. It's these 3 bolts located right on the frame in front of the driver's wheel.
It's gonna be hard. Tires in the way. It's just a hair.
No, we can get the wrench.
It's just a hard. They're on there tight. Okay, what wrench?
The wrench might be. Now the task is to get enough clearance to get your puller tool on the gearbox joint. The trick on the Hummer H2 is to use a 21mm impact socket and remove the 3 steering box bolts from the frame. These are accessed on the frame inside the driver wheel well. I believe this is where the job differs between GMT 800 platforms. I vaguely remember having to turn the wheel a specific direction for my Suburban, so at this point, if you aren't working on a Hummer, you might want to research your particular vehicle for the trick to get this joint off.
It's just a hard, they're on there tight. Okay, what wrench?
Once the steering box is loosened, you can mount your ball joint puller between the Pitman arm and the gearbox. Be careful not to score and damage the dust boot. You should be able to use your finger and fold it up out of the way. Once the puller is mounted and hand tightened, it is time to line up the steering gearbox again. If you forget to do this, chances are it will bind up on you and you'll just be using up all the air in your tank. We learned this the hard way. Now to line things up, we hand tightened this bolt and that bolt right there. It's nice to have two people, one person on the back. You can see that wiggling now as he's trying to get the Pitman arm off. One person on the front to hand tighten those in.
I pulled it, didn't it?
No, I pulled the steering box.
Did?
Yeah. There you go. Now, due to the tight clearances in Hummer H2 and probably the general 3/4 ton, as we popped the backside out, front side tightened again, we had to use the puller machine again. And there, we have the old one out. Here's the old one sitting next to the new one. Notice, if I put my foot right here, wiggle this one, it will shake.
Ready?
Yep. Notice that one. I'll come on the side over here. Go ahead and wiggle this one again. If you notice, that has quite a bit of play with just basic hand pressure. Let's look at the new one. It's extremely difficult.
Get the nut off so you can see it.
No play at all.
What's moving is the
handle in the back. That's how you know that that was bad, and that always makes you feel good after you go through all the effort to get the Pitman arm off. The worst thing you could do is pull that off and have that be tight. So job well done. In the bag there should be a cotter pin for your castle nut and a Zerk fitting. And we're going to grease it here before we install it, so it's a little bit easier to do. Okay, the Zerk fitting, it goes on with an 8mm socket. Tighten it till it goes up snug. You don't want to go too tight and strip those threads out. This is just to hold the grease in.
Good enough?
Yeah, that's good. Now, any good automotive grease should work for this application. I like to just carry one. I use Red Grease Extreme Pressure. What I like to look for is the typical dropping temperature. The dropping point of this is 500 degrees Fahrenheit. The reason I have this high-tech premium grease, it's going to cost you a little more, is I like to put them on U-joints next to the catalytic converters, which have a tendency to dry out grease that doesn't have as good of a dropping point. And so notice it's a lithium complex grease, 500 degree, that's what I like to look for. That'll work just fine for this application too. We'll squirt a little bit. Now they may say it's lubricated from the factory. Your salesman may. Typically,
enough, 3.
Yeah, typically bearing manufacturers just put enough grease on there to prevent corrosion, and they want you to grease it in the field. We went with 3 presses right there in order to maintain the seal. It should have popped that out a little bit. You can see the red starting to come out, and so you know you've got enough. You don't want to do too much and blow your seal out. The Pitman arm, before it goes in, you need to make sure it's aligned. There are thick splines, 3 of them. You can see one of those very well. There's one there, one on the other side here. Those need to be aligned with the steering box. You can see on the steering box up there, there's one of the thick flat plates right there. Now, since we didn't move or play with the wheel, theoretically this should slide right in and line right up. Whatever you do, don't force it and damage your steering box. steering box still loose. Should be able to line that up nicely with those three splines, just like that, and then set the back side in on its hole without a lot of pressure. Is it in the hole?
Yep.
Okay. And then tighten up the steering box. Before we mount it, we'll take the 21 millimeter, and we're not going to torque these down yet. We're just going to snug them up. We hand threaded them to make sure they're not cross
For
threaded.
the steering box.
And these are the 3 bolts for the steering box. Once you've tightened the steering box, we started by installing the castle nut on the drag link ball joint end.
Now I'm going to start this one. Lock washer.
Yeah. Did you get a new lock washer?
Nope, not for this, because it wants the steering box.
Well, that sucks.
Just get that started. Is it lined up? I can't.
It doesn't. It looks really
No,
crooked.
it's crooked. Edit all that out.
Oh, I don't make mistakes.
I'm going to flip this over and see if I can get it done.
This particular model, the gearbox threads were scored from a previous job.
There, it started. That just to hold it in place.
Yep.
Do you want to shine under here and show the bending of this?
I actually can see it really good from here.
Okay, I'm bending it
Yeah, I
there.
see that. It's got the cotter pin through the hole. It's using a 7/8 socket. It's different than the one that came off. So depending on which part you get, you may want to check. And then you tighten it and it will pull the ball joint down just enough so that you can get that cotter pin through the hole, then bend it to lock the castle nut. It won't spin out. Next is the steering gearbox nut, which GM says to tighten to 185 foot-pounds. I don't believe we'll be able to get our torque wrench on there. So tighten it tight.
You ready?
Yeah. Okay, using that long wrench, brace your feet against the passenger wheel and pull tight until about a 1/2 inch, or as you can see on ours,
That's this one.
just a couple threads show at the bottom.
Pull it hard. But that's as tight as it's going
And
to
you
get.
can't go anymore.
You make it tight.
Make it tight.
And then you pull this down.
Then gently pull your dust boot back down. And we are torquing to 145 foot-pounds, which is what I could find is the required torque for the steering gearbox on a 2005 3/4 ton pickup. I was unable to find an official H2 listing, but we're going with that. And you can see on the track bar the steering damper right there. We're going to be removing the Pitman arm,
Idler arm.
the Idler arm. We'll be removing that by removing this bolt at the bottom.
You point to it.
No, I can see it really good.
And then getting the jaws on that. That bolt on the track bar connection of the idler arm, you're going to use a 13/16 impact socket, and we're going to loosen that with an air-powered impact driver. Now, you can use a socket set if you don't have access to air tools, but it's 13/16. On the wire. Ready? Both 13/16. Worked okay. Ready? Yep. Okay, hold on. Go back on top. Okay. Oh, that's beautiful.
The trick to getting the idler arm out is to pull downward on the top of the idler strut arm while striking the idler arm with a hammer and pushing down on the track bar. Yeah, it's kind of frustrating.
With the idler arm off, along with the strut, you're going to need a 15/16 impact socket in order to get that bolt off. And it's going to be a lot easier now that it's out of the vehicle.
Before you do it, let's find out what this is.
It's 3/4. That was easy. Give the old one a test. You can see it wiggles a little bit by hand. It's not as bad as I've seen them before, but it's still on its way out. For comparison, let's do the same with the new joint. Notice that is not moving. And like the Pitman arm, this is going to need to be greased. Now's a good time to grease it yourself. If you turn it around, you'll see the hole for the zerk fitting inside your packet. Should be a fitting. We'll go and assemble that right now. Just hand start it gently. Your zerk fitting, when it's done, should be in line with the vehicle, with the idler arm, in order to allow greasing while it's online. Using your high temperature grease. Snap it on, we on. How many do you want to go?
3, 4.
Now's a good time to grease the strut.
What do they call this thing? We'll have to find out what it's called. Just 2.
Maybe 3.
Yeah.
That'll dry. We need to assemble the idler arm onto the idler post right here. Now we're reusing the old post, which means due to corrosion and whatever, the threads on the inside of this Allen key were a little buggered up. We had to use penetrant oil to get in an 8 millimeter Allen head is used to prevent that from turning as you tighten the bolt. Now we had to clean it out, and we're going to use a ball peen hammer to set that on. Now to tighten it, use a 25 millimeter wrench.
It's a little big, but it'll work.
sure you get that square. Gently tap it and it will go right in. If you're using a new post, you shouldn't have to do this. See the gap? It's nice with two people to hold on. Can't. Oh wow.
Let's see. Good stuff. Go ahead and pull it to an easy spot for you. You ready? Let's try. I think it's supposed to float a little bit.
Yeah, that's its job. Now to fit it up.
So the back and the post with the track bar. And you left it loose. So you can adjust that idler post.
Wow, I push this up.
Okay, if you need to adjust anything, pull down on the track bar right there. And that will give you room to align those bolt holes.
Take a small hammer. Where's your
With the top one bolted in as a pivot, come back down to the bottom of the idler arm and put the castle nut on the track bar and tighten that down. That will lift the track bar up and will allow you to align the bottom hole on the idler post.
a little tight. See it pull the bar up.
Okay.
Okay.
A little more, couple more hits and you'll be able to do it. Right there. We're gonna have to pull that nut back and do it out of sequence.
That's fine.
Let's get that bolt in first.
Okay.
Looks like lefty loosey.
Why didn't you tell me?
Makes for good video.
That's what
Man,
I'm
you're
saying.
going really tight.
This doesn't have a leverage to it. With this.
Yeah.
Okay. Cotter finger in the hole. Can you feel that? How'd you have any pliers? You see it okay?
Yep.
There you go. Job done.
Skid plate. There's reverse removal. 15mm bolts. Get these three at the top hand started. Having two people makes it a lot easier. Then work your way to the back and get those back ones anchored on. Yep, the back, those bars, these bars on this skid plate hang down, and with one person it's really hard to get this skid plate to pinch it up. So one trick is to use a floor jack. We'll just pump this up, we'll line the bolts, and it will allow you to get those final nuts in with a single person. There it goes.
Putting it back in, on the other hand, is a little hard because of aligning these bolts. Take a little bit of trial and error, make sure all the bolts go in square, and don't strip them out.